Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. And in many ways, I think today's video is going to fit beautifully in a paired playlist with a video from a little while ago that I made on the Order of the Garter, because today I want to look at another order of chivalry, namely the Order of the Bath. But as we take a look at this other order, I also want to explore the function and power of the Magnificent, of the ceremonial. And that's both within the community as a whole and, I think, perhaps more obviously, when it comes to the individual who is actually experiencing it. The person having the ceremony done to them, I suppose. Across the centuries, there was this growing perception that the ceremony of coronation, for example, was literally transformative. That the monarch being crowned was transmuted, altered, and in some cases made semi-divine through being crowned. And when we look at other ceremonies of ascent, which were, of course, frequently tied to monarchy and were usually the gift of the monarch in question, is it not a logical extension that those rituals of ascent, to make knights, for example, or dukes, or earls, or whatever else, would they not be equally transformative? Moments of change in the lives of the people who underwent them too. Let's have a look at it. The most honourable Order of the Bath, in its contemporary form, dates from the 18th of May 1725, when it was established as a military order by the letters patent of King George I. And at this point, the Dean of Westminster was made the Dean of the Order, and the fabulous Henry VII Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey was made the Chapel of the Order. And I do plan on finishing today's video by looking at the ceremonies, insignias, robes, etc. of this particular iteration of the order, but I want to begin today by looking at where it all started. Because this new Order of the Bath revived traditions that had medieval origins. But what were they? The earliest extant official document to make reference to there being a ceremony of bathing at the creation of a knight dates back to 1128. We are told the tale of Geoffrey. He was the 15-year-old son of Fulk, Count of Anjou, and he was bathed before being made a knight. However, the first recorded description of the ceremony that would go on to become traditional for the creation of new Knights of the Bath comes from a later period, from the late 14th century to be exact, and the coronation of King Henry IV. And as we're going to see, Henry IV went heavy on the ceremony, and perhaps that's understandable. After all, Henry Bolingbroke, as history also knows him, was the cousin of the former King Richard II. But Richard was still alive while Henry began his rule, at least he was for a while, because Richard was his cousin's prisoner, having been formally deposed on September the 30th, 1399. And then 2 weeks later, on October 13th, 1399, King Henry IV's coronation took place. The day chosen was an auspicious one, as it just so happened to be the feast day of England's very own sainted king, Edward the Confessor. To prepare for his coronation, Henry rode through the streets of London in all the splendour that might be expected of a king. It was said that he caught the eye by being apparelled in gold and blue, and that he rode a fabulous white horse. Henry spent the 2 nights before his coronation at the Tower of London. Chris Given Wilson explains that the king was accompanied by, quote, 2,000 lords, ladies, knights, clerks, and household servants, all wearing newly made robes, and perhaps 3 times as many horses. Among this number were between 40 and 50 men who had been chosen to be elevated to knighthood. In preparation, these men would be ritually bathed, hence the name, the Knights of the Bath. And then, after this, they would spend their whole night confessing, being absolved, praying, holding vigil. In some cases, there may have been a couple of hours for sleep, but certainly not in all. The utterly breathtaking late 11th century chapel of St. John the Evangelist in the White Tower was chosen to play host to this particular ritual of knighthood. The men would be knighted during Mass on Sunday morning, and this Sunday morning was also Coronation Day. At this time, their allegiance to their king was sworn, assured, and fully expected to continue. But these new knights would not be the only ones going through something like this at this time, because King Henry would also be submitting himself to the ritual purification of bathing, before undertaking his own night-long vigil of confession, absolution, and prayer, so that he could prepare himself for coronation, to which he would process accompanied by these new-made knights, in addition to the rest of the company, the following day. Henry was crowned at Westminster, but there were some ceremonial additions to the traditional form of coronation in this case. It is said, for example, that Henry was the first monarch to be anointed with a sacred oil that it was claimed had been given to Thomas Becket by the Virgin Mary, and he may also have been the first to be seated upon a throne that contained the Stone of Scone, that Edward I had taken from Scotland. Transformation, even if only in the form of purification, was, I think, clearly a key element of both knight and king-making, but also of vital importance when it comes to explaining the original intent or purpose for the creation of the Knights of the Bath at this time, is that doing so offered King Henry IV supplementary spaces for ennoblement. To return to Chris Given Wilson, quote, "The existing royal order of knighthood in England, that of the Garter, was restricted by its statutes to 26 members, and included many who, as Richard's nominees, were politically unreliable. Henry's new knights, by contrast, were mostly staunch Lancastrians, and would form a chivalrically bound fraternity of young braves, dedicated by their act of creation to the personal service of the new sovereign. Henry IV's son and heir, also Henry, who would become Henry V, would have similar ceremonies occur around his coronation. We are told that, quote, the king was conducted to the Tower of London, where about 50 gallant young gentlemen or more, of noble birth, well qualified to receive the degree of knighthood, waited in expectation that they might receive this honour from the hands of so great a monarch at the first opening of so glorious a solemnity. The young candidates, according to custom, at a convenient time prescribed, went into the bath prepared severally for them for performing their vigils, the whole night having been devoted to these lubrications. Early the next morning, upon the first appearance of light, and when they had gone regularly through the course of their devotion, having mounted their fine horses, they rode in their silk mantles until they came to the gate of the royal palace, where, descending from their horses, each of them being supported by 2 knights, and conducted with all marks of honour and respect suitable to his different quality, was introduced and presented to the king, who, sitting in royal state, the throne being surrounded with a numerous train of noble and great personages, promoted them severally to the honour of knighthood. The Tower of London would continue to play host to monarchs on the eve of their coronation for nearly 3 centuries. Charles II would be the last to process from the Tower of London to Westminster for his coronation on the 23rd of April, 1661. It was also during the reign of King Charles II that the custom of creating new Knights of the Bath at the time of coronation, and indeed in general, would have its final hurrah. And I think it's interesting when we consider the ceremonial origin of the creation of those Knights of the Bath in the first place, and the fact that it can be connected to the coronation of a monarch who had made good on a blood claim to the throne by conquest and the deposition of his predecessor, that these ceremonies were then last used, before their later resurrection, at the coronation of a monarch whose own father, the previous king, had been publicly beheaded as a traitor. In both cases, I think we can see how there might be a degree of anxiety or a sense of instability about the rule that was to come. Was it perhaps hoped, or might it have indeed been the case, that the gathering and rewarding of numerous loyal companions at the point of coronation was able to exert a stabilising influence at the top of society? Well, let's have a look at some other examples. During the reign of Henry VII, new Knights of the Bath were created before Henry's own coronation on the 30th of October 1485, and also before the coronation of his consort Elizabeth of York on the 25th of November 1487. A few years later, Henry and Elizabeth's younger son, also called Henry, who would go on to become King Henry VIII, would be admitted as a Knight of the Bath at the very end of October 1494. This elevation occurred against the backdrop of a growing threat that was represented by the claims that were being made by Perkin Warbeck, which were that he was, in truth, the younger brother of Henry VII's wife and queen, meaning that he was Richard, Duke of York, and so the throne was rightfully his. Henry VII denounced him as an impostor, but Warbeck did have support, both in England and overseas, and so it seems the king decided to enhance the status of his own younger son to counteract, as much as possible, the appeal of Warbeck. He decided that he would make Henry a Knight of the Bath and give him a new title. At the same time, some 20 other men would also be admitted as Knights of the Bath beside the young prince. On the 29th of October 1494, Prince Henry rode through London to the Palace of Westminster astride a warhorse. Once he arrived, the ceremonies of knighthood began. First, he served his father at table by helping him to wash his hands. The prince was then ritually bathed while being reminded of his duties as a knight. The king, his father, then arrived, dipped his finger into the bathwater and made the sign of the cross on his son's right shoulder before kissing the mark. The prince was then removed from the bath, dried, dressed in rustic clothing, and taken to St Stephen's Chapel at Westminster. The hopeful knights-to-be, Prince Henry included, were then expected to confess their sins, be absolved, and hear Mass. Then there would just be a few hours to sleep before the entire company would be roused so that they could ride to Westminster Hall, where the king would knight them all. An oath of fealty would have had to have been memorised so that it could be recited. The day after all of this, on November the 1st, 1494, Prince Henry was made Duke of York. This was the title that Warbeck was laying claim to by asserting that he was, in fact, Richard, Duke of York. Afterwards, there was a large-scale tournament to celebrate. Throughout all of this, Prince Henry, we are told, occupied pride of place and, by all accounts, comported himself beautifully, which, if true, is frankly quite remarkable, because Prince Henry was born on the 28th of June 1491. So that means that at the time of this ceremonial knighting in the October to November of 1494, he was just 3 years old. With that in mind, I wonder, would he have been able to remember the experience? In any case, how much do you think his memories would have been coloured by the tales of the event that he would no doubt have been told later? What effect would this have had on shaping the man, the king, that he would ultimately become? As we've just learnt, Henry VIII had been knighted as a boy at Westminster, but when it came time for his coronation, he would follow the, by then, familiar traditions. Henry and his new wife, Catherine of Aragon, would go to the Tower of London. They would stay there for a few days before they would process to Westminster for their joint coronation, which took place on the 24th of June, 1509. While they were staying at the Tower at this time, the new king created 26 new Knights of the Bath, seemingly following the exact same order of ceremonies that he himself had experienced as a young child. One of the new knights created on this occasion was Sir Thomas Boleyn. Nearly 24 years after Thomas was inducted as a Knight of the Bath, the Tower of London would be made ready to fulfil its ceremonial role for another coronation. And once again, Thomas Boleyn, who was by then also a Garter Knight, and the Earl of Wiltshire and Ormond had a part to play, albeit potentially a more substantial and prominent one. Thomas's daughter, Anne Boleyn, was to be crowned Queen of England. On the 29th of May 1533, a flotilla of spectacular barges made their way from Greenwich Palace to the Tower of London. Anne, who was pregnant with Elizabeth at this point, was on board one of them. She disembarked at Tower Wharf, and with the king, her husband, she made her way to the royal apartments, which had been redecorated for the occasion. On the evening of the 29th of May, the 18 men, quote, who were appointed to be Knights of the Bath, served the king at dinner, and were bathed and shriven according to custom. The next day, they were dubbed. Anne would process through the city to the Palace of Westminster on the 31st of May 1533, so that she could prepare for her coronation at Westminster the following day. On Whitsunday, the 1st of June 1533, Anne would be crowned with St Edward's crown. This was the crown that had been put upon her husband's head during his coronation back in 1509. For any consort, but I think particularly this consort, to be permitted to wear it for their coronation can, I think, be read as a clear statement, specifically about a right to place and title. And I think that is what is being made here. Just over a century after Anne Boleyn's coronation, Charles II was being crowned, and he decided to have 61 badges of the Order of the Bath commissioned so that he could distribute them among the newly minted knights from his own coronation of 1661. These badges on this occasion bore a Latin motto that translates to 3 joined in 1, and it came with 3 crowns. This is a reference to the crowns of England, Scotland and Ireland, but it may also have been intended to invoke the Holy Trinity. When George I founded the most honourable Order of the Bath nearly a century later still, the crowns and motto endured. After all, George I also had to assert in some ways his right to rule, as he attempted to see off that Jacobite threat. In 1815, the order was enlarged and restructured by George I's great-great-grandson, who was then the Prince Regent and who would later become King George IV. And at this point, 3 classes of knight were formed. In order of prestige and precedence from the top to the bottom, they are as follows: Knights Grand Cross, Knights Commander, and Companions. Prinny, as he was known from time to time, also gets the credit for doing away with the ritual bathing part of the ceremony. With the Prince Regent's changes, it became possible for the first time to admit a select number of highly distinguished civilians into this formerly military order. Then, in 1847, during the reign of King George IV's niece, Queen Victoria, the order broadened out yet further to include a civil division. Just as with the banners, crests and stall plates that we discussed in the previous video that looked at the ceremonies of the Knights of the Garter at St George's Chapel, Windsor, the same tradition is very much in force for the chapel at Westminster and the Order of the Bath. However, with that being said, between 1812 and 1913, no new installations took place in the Westminster Chapel, and in part this is due to the swelling of the order, as it was just filled up with heroes from the Napoleonic Wars, and so there's scant space for all the banners, crests and plates that could, by rights, have been installed. The change from 1913, however, came from King George V, who revived the service in which these items were installed in that chapel. According to the website of Westminster Abbey, quote, the banner, size 6 feet by 6 feet, crest and mantling of each GCB, which stands for Knight Grand Cross or Dame Grand Cross, hang above their stall until their death, when they are returned to their family. But a copper stall plate, enamelled with their coat of arms, remains as a permanent record. A green laurel wreath is hung above the seat for a short while after the death. As there are only 34 stalls available, knights often had to wait many years before a stall became vacant. For example, Lord Mountbatten had to wait 17 years. The first woman was admitted into the order in 1971. Today, the order is structured as follows. The sovereign of the Order of the Bath is the British sovereign, so now that is His Majesty King Charles III. Next comes the Great Master. Now, this position is currently vacant, as King Charles was the person that occupied it until the death of his mother earlier this year. I assume that the next person to take up the role will do so at the next Order of the Bath service, whether that be next year or later. And I have said it that way for a particular reason, because I do want to engage in some conspiracy speculation. May is the month where these ceremonies of installation customarily take place. Now, traditionally, that is every 4 years, and there was just such a ceremony celebrated on the 24th of May. Do we think it's possible, if we consider the fact that His Majesty's coronation is going to take place on the 6th of May 2023, that the Order of the Bath ceremony might occur a bit early? Granted, 3 years and a few days early. And if it did, what if they did it in the chapel of St John the Evangelist again? To be clear, I don't think this is going to be a likely outcome or event, just as there probably aren't going to be a bunch of temporary baths set up in the White Tower so that we can take it all the way back to the very start of the ceremony. But that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be an interesting thing to watch, because we could essentially use the coronation as a chance, an opportunity to reconstruct the ceremonies that surrounded medieval and early modern coronations. And I, for one, think that would be really cool. But that's just got me sidetracked. Coming next after the Great Master are the Knights and Dames Grand Cross, then after them the Knights and Dames Commander, and then last but by no means least, the Companions. For those who are not subjects of the British monarch, there are honorary memberships of the order that may be awarded to them. For regalia, on ceremonial occasions such as Order of the Bath installation ceremonies and coronations, the Sovereign, Great Master and Knights and Dames Grand Cross are entitled to wear the mantle. This is made of crimson satin, lined with white taffeta, with cord and tassels at the closure, large white bows on the shoulders and a star on the left side. The insignia on the mantle differs depending on whether the recipient is military or civilian. Here is a drawing of the insignia of a Knight Grand Cross of the Civil Division of the Order. We see the badge, with 3 crowns encircled by the motto, 3 joined in 1 on a red background. It sits atop a silver star. The collar is gold and silver, and within it there are 9 imperial crowns that are linked by 17 silver knots to 8 floral designs, which contain roses, shamrocks and thistles for England, Ireland and Scotland respectively. On the neck badge, we see the 3 crowns again. Once more, there is the motto, but there is also on the badge a sceptre, from which a rose, thistle and shamrock seem to spring. The change for the military form is shown here. The badge, encircled now by laurel leaves, sits upon a Maltese cross, with a secondary motto, Ich dien, or I serve, below it, all of which is then placed atop a silver star. In the case of the collar, the Maltese cross is enamelled in white. It is 8-pointed, with each point having a gold ball to decorate it, and there are lions in the angles. The laurel wreaths encircle the motto on the red background, which itself encircles 3 crowns, accompanied by that sceptre, with the rose, thistle and shamrock included. There are also variations to the regalia and insignia depending upon which class of the order you occupy. If we look at this example used for Knight and Dame commanders, we see a clear change. The silver star has been exchanged for a silver cross, but the rest of the insignia, as we can see, remains visually very similar, if not the same. For companions, we see there is no star, just the badge by itself. Something that's hard to depict in photographs or pick up in photographs, but that we are told occurs in real life, is the fact that the companion's badge is smaller than that worn by the Knight or Dame commander, and their badge, in turn, is smaller than that is worn by the Knight or Dame Grand Cross. So what do you think of the Most Honourable Order of the Bath, of its origins, its contemporary form, of the potential effects of those who have been inducted into its ranks down the centuries? Also, what do you think of my idea for making next year's coronation into part of an experimental archaeology event? I wonder, would you be as interested as I would be in seeing something like that play out? And speaking of interest, would any of you be keen on me making another video on any of the other orders of chivalry that we have? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video, or you can find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box, so please do follow me over on some or all of them so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. Let me know you liked it by hitting the thumbs up, and please subscribe to the channel. I can see that people are watching my videos. Hopefully they're liking them, but they aren't all subscribed. Maybe that's you. You've been checking me out for a while. Not sure if you like it. Maybe you decide to stick around. If you have, just subscribe. You know, it makes sense. Also though, if you think you are subscribed, please have a little check. Make sure that YouTube is not up to shenanigans, unsubscribing you against your will in a mysterious fashion. You can do it right now. Have a little check. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, you're going to notice there's a bell icon beside the subscribe button. Give that a little smash. You're going to see a drop down. Hit all in the drop down. That way, YouTube allegedly will tell you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video, which I think will be the last one before Christmas. So, take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.